Hello everyone, it's Thursday and you're watching Within the Frame, where we delve deeper into the top stories not only in South Korea but across the globe. I'm Kim Bo-kyung. On Monday this week, the South Korean government announced a plan to compensate Japan's wartime forced labor victims. Funds procured through a public foundation under Interior Ministry called the Foundation for Victims of Forced Mobilization by Imperial Japan will be used to compensate the victims. The contributions would be from Korean companies such as steelmaker POSCO, who benefited from the 1965 claim settlement agreement, which normalized ties between Korea and Japan. Some victims have protested the plan, saying it doesn't involve direct payments from Japanese companies who were ordered by Seoul Supreme Court to compensate them in 2018. This while the nation's foreign minister has stressed the solution serves to overcome tensions between two countries and pave the way for a new era. For an in-depth analysis on Seoul's plan to compensate wartime forced labor victims, we invited Arirang's very own foreign affairs correspondent Choi Min-jung into the studio. Min-jung, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
And we also have Kim Jae-chun, Professor and Dean of Seogang Graduate School of International Studies on the line. Professor Kim, welcome and thank you for your time.
Great to be here.
All right, first question to you, Min-jung. The South Korean government on Monday announced a plan to compensate victims of Japan's forced labor through a fund created by Korean companies. Could you share details of the government's plan and also the relevant background information?
Right, as you said, earlier in the week, the government announced that it will compensate the victims of Japan's forced labor through a third party. Back in 2018, South Korea's Supreme Court ordered two Japanese companies, Mitsubishi Heavy Industries and Nippon Steel, to compensate the Koreans they subjected to forced labor. But those firms refused to comply. And Tokyo has been insisting that the issue of compensation was settled under a normalization treaty signed in 1965. But South Korea's compensation plan says instead of having the two Japanese firms pay the compensation, funds will be procured through a public foundation called the Foundation for Victims of Forced Mobilization by Imperial Japan. And now this foundation was established in 2014 to raise funds from Korean companies that benefited from the 1965 treaty. One of the companies is South Korea's POSCO, so in the end, it's the Korean companies that are contributing instead of the Japanese firms. South Korea's president and foreign minister said the solution is aimed at improving Seoul-Tokyo ties.
그동안 정부가 피해자의 입장을 존중하면서 한일 양국의 공동 이익과 미래 발전에 부합하는 방안을 모색해온 결과입니다.
We hope this solution serves to overcome the tensions between South Korea and Japan and pave the way for a new era. I think this is the last chance to do this.
Right, Professor Kim, the announcement is an unprecedented move considering 4 years of the two countries are arguing over the matter. What do you believe were the main reasons behind the government's decision?
Well, it's no secret that the relationship between the two countries hit the rock bottom in past 5 years. The previous government in South Korea sort of reneged on comfort women agreement that was entered into in 2015, and then that Supreme Court decision came out. In response, Japan withdrew South Korea from the whitelist, and South Korea suspended GSOMIA, that intelligence sharing deal. Since then, the relationship between the two countries has been all downhill. And this is very unfortunate because there is an urgent need for two countries to work together to deter North Koreans and to protect and promote rules-based liberal international order. You know, two countries share identities as liberal democracy, as capitalist market economy, and share many critical interests. I think this was very urgent. I mean, I think it was this urgent need that compelled President Yoon Suk-yeol to take a very bold step and presented a very proactive solution to the forced labor victim issue, which was the major roadblock between the two countries.
Right. So South Korea made a bold step, brave step in order to, tackle a lot of challenges and hardship that two countries are facing together. However, Min-jung, the resolution immediately provoked a fierce backlash from victims and their families. Could you tell us more?
Right, the deal has actually created a big stir in the country. The victims, families, and civic groups have been protesting against the government's plan, saying this issue cannot be resolved without sincere apologies and participation from the Japanese companies. Civic groups took to the streets in front of the National Assembly, saying the plan is a national humiliation, and two forced labor victims also spoke up against the plan. Let's take a listen.
I just don't understand. I'm 95 years old and I've never seen anything like this.
If Japan apologizes even now, say sorry, say one word, and it'll be done. You've said nothing and made us get seriously sickened. The more I think, the more tears come out.
We've been taking legal action for almost 30 years without any help from the Korean or Japanese governments. It's a shame that it had to end like this.
Now, Professor Kim, as Min-jung told us, victims and family members are refusing to the resolution, and if victims refuse it, I heard that this third-party payment could face legal obstacles. Is this true, and what is this about?
Sure, there are possible legal obstacles. I mean, if victims refuse this third-party payment, we can't really say that this third-party solution is a workable solution. That's, I think, why South Korean government initially took great pains to come up with a solution that sort of mandates Japanese companies to, pay for the compensation. That way, victims would have been more willing to accept the third-party compensation solution. I mean, if Nippon Steel and Mitsubishi, if their money is in, victims would have accepted the third-party compensation, but Japanese government had no intention to allow these companies to pay. But the government, Yoon Suk-yeol government, was thinking if they don't pay, they don't pay. We can't pay. But now the problem is how to persuade these victims, how to persuade South Korean public and then many skeptics in South Korea. So I think there are many more hurdles to cross in South Korea, I mean, in terms of South Korean domestic politics.
Right, I see. Now, it seems like we cannot leave out Japan's point of view, of course, and for this, we would like to invite Hiroaki Wada, senior writer of Mainichi newspaper. Mr. Wada, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Right. Now, first of all, once South Korea's government made the announcement, what was Japan's immediate reaction and response?
Okay, the Japanese National Diet was in session, and the Prime Minister Kishida told the national gathering that he appreciated the South Korean step as something bringing back the bilateral relationship to a healthy one. He also said that South Korea is an important neighbor, that we should cooperate in addressing a variety of challenges in the international community. And we need to strengthen strategic cooperation among Japan and South Korea, and also the trilateral cooperation between Japan, the United States, and South Korea. Further, he added that he intends to closely communicate with President Yoon to develop the bilateral ties further. And as for the apology issues, he said that he'll maintain the past position of the Japanese government. Over this issue, the Foreign Minister Hayashi said that, particularly mentioned that 1998 joint declaration between Japan and South Korea, which expressed deep remorse and heartfelt apology for Japan's colonial rule. So, in essence, from the Japanese government's perspective, the response so far is positive. And as reported earlier, now the visit by President Yoon to Japan on March 16 and 17 is announced, and Chief Cabinet Secretary welcomed the move. So
Right.
that's essentially the reaction from the Japanese government.
So basically, Japan welcomes Seoul's such plan, but some say that Kishida made quite a muted response. Including Japan Times, media outlets said that Japan's cautious optimism in welcoming Seoul's plan was an evidence of a balancing act from Kishida, with Kishida having to consider the conservative wing of the ruling Liberal Democratic Party. Is this so, or are there any other political reasons behind this muted response?
Well, that's one factor, I think, but equally important is this cautiousness on the part of the Japanese government about what happened in the past. And a key question here probably is this announcement, this arrangement, irreversible? And this question is based on this memory of the 2015 agreement between Japan and South Korea over the Korean woman who were forced to offer sexual services to Japanese soldiers during World War II. The agreement, as you know, was deemed as final and irreversible, but the agreement didn't get through, partly because of strong opposition from the South Korean public, I understand. So the government and many people in the Japanese society, for that matter, I think fear the same thing may happen. So they are cautious, and the Prime Minister Kishida was cautious in part because he was not sure at this moment, at the time of the announcement, that this announcement will stick. And I understand there's substantial opposition, not only from the victims themselves, their supporters, but also from the South Korean general public toward the young government position. So the Japanese government and people in Japan mainly will maintain the cautious attitude all the time, meaning to see if the same thing happens, to see if what happened in 2015 will repeat again.
Right. Now I can see why Japanese government was quite cautious on this matter. But still, Mr. Wada, many experts say the significance of Seoul's announcement will be measured largely by what Japan does next. And some say some kind of apology from Tokyo or donations from the two Japanese companies that were ruled liable by Korea's Supreme Court would help ensure the South Korean public to accept Seoul's plan. What is your view on this point?
I see a point, but as far as a fresh approach from the Japanese government, you can't really expect that to come out. As I mentioned earlier, the Foreign Minister Hayashi said that the Japanese government will maintain the same position as announced in the 1998 Joint Declaration about Japan's colonial rule of the Korean Peninsula, and the promotes and heartfelt apology for the damage done to the Korean people. But beyond that, I don't really see any fresh initiative, active moves by Japanese government officials to offer a new apology. The basic position is, well, we already made our apologies in the past and we'll stick with that. Unfortunately, for South Korean victims' perspective, I think. And as for the donations, again, direct donations from those two companies or others are not really visible right now. And I understand that there are some reports about Japanese business groups and South Korean business groups setting up a joint fund together to offer future exchange of young students between Japan and South Korea. And Japanese business group Keidanren's chief told a press conference that they are considering such measures, but no clear and concrete measures are coming out yet. So we have to see here.
Right, we'll have to see. All right, thank you, Mr. Wada, for sharing Japan's view on the matter with us. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
All right, why don't we move back to our Minjung? Let's tap on the economic front as well. On top of taming the forced labor feud, South Korea and Japan decided to launch official talks over the lifting of Japan's curbs on exports to Korea, which have been in place since 2019. Could you give us some details on this?
Right. The general sentiment is that Japan's export curbs on South Korea should be lifted in order to mend their sour relations. As you said, the two countries decided to launch official talks on lifting the 2019 curbs, and this was when Japan slapped restrictions in apparent retaliation for the South Korean Supreme Court's ruling the year before. Now, Tokyo imposed export controls on 3 major industrial materials that are necessary for South Korea's production of chips and displays, and it also removed Seoul from its so-called white list of countries that receive preferential trade treatment. In response, South Korea filed a complaint with the World Trade Organization over the trade dispute, claiming it was a discriminatory act that goes against WTO rules. But on Monday, Seoul's trade ministry announced that the government have decided to halt WTO dispute settlement procedures as well.
Right, I see. Now, Professor Kim, a trade ministry official said Korea and Japan could hold bilateral talks to resolve the export curb feud as early as this month. And could this be a starting point for the restoration of frayed bilateral relationship with Japan? And what significance does this have with regard to ties between two countries?
The significance is that two countries will normalize their economic relations for sure. As Minjung says, South Korea will be back on Japan's white list. South Korea will probably drop that WTO litigation. I mean, think about it. This is the era of economic security. I mean, this is the era of deglobalization, I mean, to exaggerate a little bit. And what we are witnessing is unraveling of global supply chain. You know, decoupling of supply chain in key strategic sectors, such as chips industry, lithium battery, rare earth soil, biochemical products, key biochemical products. And countries are reshoring and countries are friendshoring. You know, this is to enhance their economic security. So, you know, this is a time for South Korea and Japan to work together to safeguard and to strengthen our supply chains. But the history issue has been in the way. Now the momentum is created in a way that we can really put the past behind and move forward and work very closely in economic security policies in earnest.
Right, now we'll be able to strengthen our cooperation. Now, Professor Kim, we need to also tap on the security issues as well. And South Korea and Japan's information sharing agreement known as GSOMIA is expected to also be normalized. What are your thoughts on this?
Right, in the beginning, the decision to nullify GSOMIA wasn't really a smart decision in the first place. It was like the last symbol of security cooperation between South Korea and Japan. And that decision wasn't really well received by Americans as well. Americans were very critical of South Korea's decision to walk out of GSOMIA deal. Later, the previous government in South Korea didn't really implement the decision to nullify GSOMIA. So GSOMIA has been in limbo. GSOMIA has been suspended more or less. So if we normalize GSOMIA, you know, and then I think it's going to be a very, very important first step to re-strengthen our security partnership. So all in all, I think it's going to be a very, very symbolic move to strengthen our security cooperation.
Right, so both security and economic partnership will be able to be strengthened. Now, Professor Kim, I believe this would be our last question, but according to Presidential Office on Thursday, which is today, President Yoon Suk-yeol will visit Japan next week for a summit with Prime Minister Fumio Kishida. And during the summit, I'd like to know what agendas do you believe would be discussed and how would improvement in relations affect trilateral cooperation between Japan, South Korea, and the U.S. amid geopolitical challenges?
I mean, things are moving really fast, aren't they? I thought that the summit was not possible in March, given lack of time, given the tight diplomatic schedules of President Yoon and also Prime Minister Kishida. As a matter of fact, Japan's chief cabinet secretary said that the summit was still up in the air. That was this morning. So this was quite surprising. What's going to be on the agenda, it's a little bit too early to call. But this is really great news. We haven't had this kind of what they call shuttle diplomacy for past 12 years since former South Korean President Lee Myung-bak paid a surprise visit to Dokdo that pretty much soured the relations between the two countries. If Japan's Prime Minister Kishida visits Seoul in return, I think South Korea and Japan relationship will be elevated to another level. And it's not just a bilateral relationship between South Korea and Japan, but that trilateral cooperation you just mentioned, that trilateral relationship between South Korea, the U.S., and Japan will really move forward in earnest.
Right, we'll have to see how this shuttle diplomacy would be able to lead us to the new era of our, cooperative ties. All right, unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today's edition, but thank you, Min-jung and Professor Kim, for letting us better understand the issue. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, this is all for Within the Frame tonight. We will be back tomorrow with more in-depth stories. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.